Okay, here's the second part of setting up our IK-FK switch. I want to break this into a two-parter so we can sort of digest the information a little bit more easily. And now that we've got our different controls for both IK and FK arms set up, let's build the actual switch by using some of those custom attribute, skills that we learned from creating stuff for our foot roll and our toe tap. Let's make some custom attributes to drive the actual switch. We'll be doing some tricky stuff with our different parent constraints. So you want to be keeping an eye on the outliner, and we'll use the node editor to help us get there. So let's go ahead and build a new control curve to actually hold that IK-FK switch value. Go up to curves, and I'm just going to look for some 2 arrows. So there's 2 arrows and there's 2 arrows thin. I'll go ahead and use 2 arrows thin, because why not? And it looks like it's created something for us down here. And since this is just to hold a switch attribute, we don't have to be as worried with, some of the different conventions we've been using. But I do want to, continue to see those good habits. So I think we'll do sort of what we've been doing before in setting this up and then freezing transforms. So I'll go ahead and scale this up a little bit, then use my rotate to rotate this on, different axes. Let's see here, I want to go to -90 on my Y. I think that's -90 on Z as well. Let's see here, I can hardly see this. I hit it. All right, there we go. All right, because I want this switch to be, facing with our root control, and we want this to hold the attribute. So this is how I want it to look. I might scale it down just a little bit. Let's hide the geometry on our girl, and I'll snap this into place. Now let's hold down V on our keyboard, and I'll snap it to the elbows. That'll do. And since this is in a similar spot as my pull vector, I might actually hop into the front view, hold down V, and drag it on my red handle just to make this, maybe the same height as my spine, and still be like at the same place, horizontally where my elbow joints are. I just want to set this out to be a little bit separate from my pull vector control. And I might even scoot this back a little bit further in space. And maybe even scoot this down a little bit more. That works for me. So now that I have this where I want it to be, I'll go ahead and run a modify freeze transformations. And let's go ahead and rename our 2 arrows thin to LT underscore IK underscore FK underscore switch underscore capital CTL. And throw it in its own group, run a modify center pivot, and again, replicate that name just with the group tag on it instead. So at this point, our IK-FK switch shouldn't really be moving in space, and I want to build my own attribute for it. So let's go ahead and go into the attribute editor first, put that attribute down, and we'll lock and hide the other ones that we don't need to see. So with my CTL, my actual control selected, I'll go over to my attribute editor. I'll go up to attributes, add attributes. And our long name, we might make this, actually I did make a mistake in naming this here. I'll make this my LT-IK-FK arm switch CTL, and same deal for the group. Because again, this is for the arm, right? If we did have ones for the legs, we'd probably want that distinction. Doesn't really matter here, but that is, again, a good naming habit that I want to get us into. Now we'll add an attribute by going up to add attributes, add attributes. Make our long name, something similar. LT-IK-FK arm switch CTL. And I'll override the nice name to just be FK/IK. Something we do want to do is change our numeric attribute properties. I want the minimum to be 0 and the maximum to be 1. Everything else, keeping our data type to a float and making our attribute type scalar, that is what we want to keep. But I'll go ahead and hit OK. Now we have our IKFK that can alternate between 0 and 1. And since this switch is only going to hold, just that for us, we don't need to really have access to or translate X, Y's, and Z's, as well as the rotate and scale. So I'll highlight all of these, right-click them, and use lock and hide selected. So now, yeah, we can't grab this and move this. This is just going to be what's holding our switch for us. And I've done this on the group. So don't be a fool like me. Let's go ahead and step back. I added my IKFK attribute to the group as opposed to the curve. So I'll go ahead and instead add that to my curve. So again, LT, IKFK, ARM, switch, CTL, override with a nice name. Just make this IK/FK. 0, maximum 1. Go ahead and hit OK. And again, the only difference there is that I just did that on the group instead of the curve, but we do want this to be on the curve. Now I'll lock and hide selected. So if I click on this, right, I can't move this. I can't rotate it. I can't scale it because this needs to do nothing else for our rig aside from hold this FK/IK value. Okay. Now that we've got that set up, we will hop into the node editor and use this IKFK value to drive how our different constraints work and, even control the visibility of our different controls. So I'm going to, with this selected, go up to Windows, down to Node Editor. And, if your node editor is completely free and clear, with that selected, you can click and hold it with your middle mouse and drag it into the node editor. Or with that selected, you can also hit this little blue tick box with the blue plus in front of it that is add selected nodes to graph. And we don't really need to deal with shape. So the shape doesn't have any attributes that's going to be useful for us, right? Like we don't need object, color, or matrix. So I'm just going to put this out of sight and out of mind for now. We do want, if I select this, either click on these 3 bars or, hit 3 on my keyboard. I am looking for this IKFK value out of here. So if you remember way back in the beginning of our class for connections, I showed you that on certain parent constraints where you have multiple parents, we have this W0 and W1 value that we can control basically what the parent is. Well, we'll use that to influence our behavior of our IKFK switch and, use our 0s and 1s to control, or from our switch attribute to control the 0s and 1s of our parent constraints. So let's go ahead and add those parent constraints to our node editor. I'm finding my wrist, elbow, and shoulder parent constraints. I want to find them over here in the outliner. Use Shift to select all of them. And just grab them with my middle mouse and drag them onto the node editor. So I have all 3 of these in here. I'll go ahead and hit 3 on my keyboard to blow these open. And now what we're looking for, again, are those FK and IK wrist W1 and W0 attributes. So the way this works is that right now our IKFK switch is outputting a value of 0. So whatever this goes into, it'll change the weight of that parent constraint to 0. So I think what we want to do is that since the way we have this written is FK/IK, we want 0 to be FK mode. So if we want it to be an FK mode, we want the IK parent constraint to have a weight value of 0. So I will take the output node from my FK/IK attribute and drag it into the IK wrist W0 attribute. And this is for, the parent constraint for my wrist, as this would imply. I'll even blow this up so we can see a little bit better. And I will do that the same way for my LT elbow parent constraints and my LT shoulder parent constraints. So again, I'll click and drag this out, connect it to my LT IK elbow W0. The same for my LT IK shoulder W0. So now what should happen is if I click and grab the FK controls that I've created and I rotate this, now it's moving the whole arm with it, and I'm not getting that halfway thing that we had before, right? Conversely, that means if I try and move my IK controller, I move the IK bone, right? But that's not the parent of our main arm anymore. So our switch is already half built here. I'll go back into my node editor and finish this up so we can sort of set ourselves up for success with a reverse node. So what I want to do is that while I'm in my node editor, I'm out here in the blank space. I'm going to hit Tab to open up a menu that allows me to bring in nodes, and I want to type reverse. And I just want R-E-V-E-R-S-E, right? I just want this reverse node. And I'll hit 3 again with that selected to get my input and outputs. There are these little plus menus, right? So I want to click the little plus to the left of input, little plus to the right of output. Right now, this is basically asking for a value with 3 different dimensions to it, but we don't need that, so we only need to access our input X and output X. So I'm going to take my FKIK, drag it out, and bring it into the input X slot of my reverse node. So basically the way this works, right, is that it's reversing the value that's coming out of there. And so if this is outputting 0, it's going to reverse that to 1 when we output it. So I'm going to go ahead and take the output, because again, we're in FK mode, so we want our FK weight to be set to 1. We'll take the output X and drag it into our FK wrist W1, our FK elbow W1, and our FK shoulder W1. So I'll continue to do that. And if we go back and test our controls, we should still be getting similar behavior. Cool. And I'll even bring back the visibility for my girl so we can see how this is behaving. Looks like that is doing all that it's supposed to. But now the way this works, right, is that back in our node editor, if our IK-FK value, which right now is outputting 0, changes to 1, it will output 0 through the reverse node, but output 1 through the regular nodes to alter or switch the weight value. So if we go back to our IK-FK control and change this to 1, we'll get a little bit of a pop in our joint now, because now this joint is being driven by the IK control instead. So now it's getting 100% control from the IK system that we set up earlier. Now, ain't that a thing of beauty? And it looks like our pull vector works as well. So that's behaving how we'd like it to. Let's go ahead and zero these out. Just get this back to where it belongs. And I'm feeling pretty good about that. So that's how you set up a switch. We'll go ahead and do a little bit of cleanup. If we're on, let's see here, if IK is 1, if we're on IK mode, we don't want our FKs to be visible right now, right? And if we're on FK mode, we don't want our IK controls to be visible. So let's go ahead and find the groups that own these, and we'll alter the visibility with our switch values as well. So I'll select the pull vector group, because, let's just start with this. Right now we're in FK mode because we're on 0. I'll go ahead and find the pull vector group, bring back my node editor, and I'll hit that little plus button to add selected nodes to graph. So again, I have this little pull vector group now available. I'll hit 3 on my keyboard, and I just want to, take these outputs to my visibility. So this is for my IK elbow pull vector, right? And right now we're in FK mode because this is set to 0. Let's go ahead and just take what's outputting 0 right now and drag it into the visibility slot of our pull vector group. So now if we take a look back, it is now hidden. So let's do the same with our IK wrist group. Add our selected nodes to graph. And again, take our FKIK out and drag it into the visibility. Again, it's outputting 0, which when you input the value 0 into the visibility slot, it'll change the visibility from on to off. So now when we're in FK mode, we won't have access to the visibility of our IK controls. And if we really even wanted to, we could do the same with our IK shoulder joints. It's not necessary, but for the sake of staying organized, let's go ahead and put those in as well. So now it's getting a little complicated in our graph, but we can change, the output of our IK out to the visibility of these as well. So now that joint chain has vanished. Again, since that obviously passes what's onto the children, right? The visibility is set to off. We have that little yellow box saying that's an outgoing connection. And we are looking great. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that same setup, but just for the FK controls. So I'll change my IK FK value to 1, just so we can test and see this to work. So now we should be in IK mode. Let's go ahead and find the first group that holds, the entire chain for our FK shoulder group. Let's go ahead and add it to our graph. And again, if you're not, if this is a little too much and it's overwhelming visibly, you can hit this little button that has sparkles to clear our graph. And then we can just manually bring, what we want back in by selecting it with Control and hitting Add Selected Nodes to Graph. So I'll bring this down so we have access to visibility. And I will bring back those parent constraints just for the sake of keeping things looking good. All right. Let's see here. So this elbow, wrist, and parent. I'll maybe visually organize my layout a little bit here. And actually what I think I'll do is I'll also show you how to graph the inputs and outputs. So with this selected, right, our reverse node looks like it's missing. It's just hidden. But with this selected, if I go up to, our 2 arrows, this shows our input and output connections. I can click that instead, and now I have access to my reverse node again. And again, that's my organizing it visually. I know it looks like it's kind of overwhelming, which frankly it is, but you just have to bear with us as we use the node editor to construct our little switch. I'll bring back my little twirl downs and bring open the output or input and output X's, and let's use that to control the visibility of our groups. Let's see here. So there's the IK wrist group. There's the elbow pull vector. Looks like I need to bring back my FK controls. There they are. I'll again add this to my graph. Now that that's there, and we're in IK mode, I can go ahead and take the output X and take it to the visibility for my reverse node. So now our FKs are gone. And again, we can do that with our joints as well. I can find my FK shoulder, add that to my graph. Let's see where I put it. Over here. And I can also take the visibility for my output X and put it into the visibility of my FK shoulder. Because again, because of that reverse node, now that we change this to 1, our reverse node is now outputting a value of 0. So if we plug that 0 into the visibility for our FK shoulder, it will now be gone. So now I can switch between these two. Switching between IK and FK, I can go into FK mode, pose things out. I'll get a little bit of this action going. Switch back to IK. It'll go back to where my IK is. And I can instead move my IK wrist around and get this set up. So now we have the opportunity to choose between those 2 different ways of controlling our rig. Even notice that even though I have 2 separate poses, right? If I switch between IK and FK, it'll actually preserve those poses. So, IK is in its own pose. If I go to FK mode, it's still holding that pose that I created before. If I go back to IK, my IK hand is where I had it before. So I'll go ahead and step back with some Control Z, just so our girl's back in position. And that is the long and short of how you create an IK switch. One last thing that I will do is I will add some, display text here so we can see visually whether or not we're on IK or FK mode. So let's go ahead and create some text. I'll go up to Create, down to Type, and over here in the attribute editor with that selected, I can change my type. I'm gonna go to the Type tab and, just write IK. And, right now this is geometry and that's not what we want, so we can convert this to curves as well. Move it right around here. Yep, there we go. So with that selected, what I did is that inside the type tab in the attribute editor, I scrolled down and I looked for geometry. And we can create curves from type. So now I can delete my type mesh. And I have access to my IK text. I will actually bring that back because I can also change this to FK while I'm here. Oops. Create curves from type. Now I can delete my type mesh. So now I have access to IK and FK. Go ahead and make these children of my switch group. And that'll work for now. And I'll go ahead and position these up in space. If you want to use V to snap them to them, you can use that as well. It may not quite work out for me. But since this is strictly visual, we can eyeball it. If we were being good custodians, I might have gotten this set up while I was creating the switch. That's okay. Scale them both down. And maybe just position these right up here. I'm fine with that. Once I'm done, I'll use a modify freeze transformations. And I can also link the visibility of my switches to the visibility of these groups. And maybe I'll even rename this to, let's see here, LT, IK, switch, text, GRP. And do the same for this. Instead, make this FK. So right now we're in FK mode, so we want our IK to be vanished. I'll go ahead and hop back into my node editor. Add this selected to the graph. If you can't find it, you can hit F and it'll bring our camera to focus around it. Right now we need this to be outputting 0. So again, if we're in FK mode, this is currently outputting 0. I can drag this into visibility. Now our IK is gone and our FK is visible. If I switch this over to 1, I can do the same, but with FK instead. So I'll select that, add the selected group to the graph, and hit 3. Again, I know it's getting kind of visually busy, right? But sometimes that's just how it is as we wire stuff up under the hood. Take my output X, which is now this reverse node is outputting 0. Change the visibility, and there we go. So now I can switch between the two. I'll pop between IK and FK. I have that label visible. So now my animators and myself can tell which version is, or what our control type is set to. And we have the power to choose between both of those. So that's how you build an IK-FK switch. I know this is fairly technically heavy work, but again, this skill is really useful of building a switch to toggle between different things. And you can even think of different ways that you can apply this to other parts. Like you can, maybe on your IK controls, control whether or not this IK control is parented to the root curve or to the world at large. So you could have, the IK hand stick at one place in space, or, move relative to the torso, among other things. So be thinking about how you can maybe use this tactic to take your rig to the next level. But that is how you do your IK-FK switch. To review, after we got our system set up by constraining these, we created our own little curve and built in an IK-FK attribute. We locked and hid everything else, so we can only change IK and FK attributes here. And we dove into the node editor. And with that, we were able to start linking things up by taking the output of our custom attribute that we created, running it through a reverse node. We're able to control which the IK or the FK joints, which of those are controlling the main movement of the joints that are actually skinned up to our girl. So in doing so, we're able to add a lot more power and precision to how our rigs are built, and we're able to use this powerful tool to make a much better rig. I know things are starting to get a little cramped over here in the outliner, and that's okay. We'll take some time to clean this up here soon enough. But for now, go ahead and call it there. Use this information for your assignment. Build that on both sides. I might even, add maybe some time lapse or add something else, after the fact to build this out for the right side as well. But that is all I have for you, and I hope this was helpful.